The strangest thing about Mercy Creek was not that Nora Mae Bennett was sent into the snow with bruises under her sleeves. It was that every decent soul in town watched and decided the weather had more mercy than they did. She stood outside the Red Lantern boarding house with her torn apron clutched to her chest, snow gathering on her bonnet, her breath coming out thin and white in the hard Wyoming air. The dinner bell had rung only 10 minutes ago. Inside, men were still eating the stew she had stirred since sunrise, still breaking the biscuits she had baked before the first light touched the courthouse roof. Outside, the cook who had fed them was being treated like something left over. "A cook who steals bread deserves snow," Mrs. Harlan called from the doorway, her sharp voice carrying clear across the street. A few people laughed. Not many. Just enough. Nora looked down at the apron in her hands. It was stained with flour, smoke, and the quiet labor of every morning she had survived in that kitchen. "I didn't steal," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The people close enough heard her. The sheriff heard her. The women under the dry goods awning heard her. Nobody moved. A man near the hitching post spit into the snow and looked away, like shame was something he could set down if he did not stare too long. Nora tried to take one step toward the boardwalk, but her knees gave a small warning, and she stopped before the town could see her fall. She was a big woman, round through the hips and soft in the middle, and Mercy Creek had never let her forget it. They had called her slow when she was careful, greedy when she ate, plain when she smiled, and useless when her hands were too tired to lift another tray. But those same hands had fed half that street through storms, funerals, cattle drives, and Sunday dinners. Those same hands now shook around a piece of apron cloth as if it were the last proof she had ever belonged anywhere. Sheriff Amos Pike stepped down from the porch, his thumbs hooked in his belt, his badge bright against his coat. "Nora Mae Bennett," he said, like her name itself was an offense. "You can make this easy." She lifted her chin. "Truth would make it easier." His smile thinned. "Truth is what respectable people agree it is." That was when the sound of horse hooves cut through the street. Slow, heavy, unhurried. Every face turned. Caleb Whitaker rode in from the North Road, hat low, coat dusted white, his bay gelding blowing steam through its nostrils. He had not come to town for company. Folks knew that. The widowed rancher of Whitaker Ranch came in for nails, coffee, salt, and nothing that required conversation. He stopped near the pump, one gloved hand resting on the saddle horn, and looked from the sheriff to Nora to the red mark of shame the whole town had tried to pin on her. Nora did not ask for help. She had learned long ago that asking gave people the pleasure of refusing. She only tried to stand straighter. The movement cost her. Caleb saw it. His eyes shifted once to the apron, once to her face, once to the snow already covering the hem of her dress. "What happened here?" he asked. Sheriff Pike gave a short laugh. "Town matter, Whitaker." "Ride on." Caleb did not ride on. Nora looked up at him then, really looked, and saw a man carved by wind and grief, a man who seemed more fence post than flesh, steady because something in him had already broken and hardened crooked. "Did you steal from them?" he asked her. The town went still. Nora swallowed. Her lips were cold enough that the words barely came. "No," Caleb held her gaze. "Say it again." "No," she said, stronger this time. "I cooked their bread. I didn't steal it." For a long second, nobody breathed. Then Caleb swung down from the saddle. His boots hit the snow with a sound that carried. Sheriff Pike's jaw tightened. "Don't make yourself part of this." Caleb walked past him as if the sheriff were no more than a fence rail. He stopped in front of Nora, close enough to block the wind, but not close enough to crowd her. "Can you walk?" he asked. Nora almost laughed, but it came out like a tired breath. "I can work." Something changed in Caleb's face, not softness, not yet, but recognition. "That ain't what I asked." She looked at the horse, then at the street full of eyes waiting for her to crumble. "I can walk if I have somewhere to go." Caleb held out one hand, palm up, giving her the choice in front of everyone. Nora stared at it for a moment. A hand offered without grabbing. Help offered without ownership. That alone nearly undid her. She placed her flour-cold fingers in his. He helped her onto the horse with a steadiness that made the laughter die before it could start again. Sheriff Pike stepped forward. "Put her down, Whitaker. That woman belongs to the town jail." Caleb gathered the reins, turned his horse toward the north road, and looked back only once. "Then bring proof to my ranch." The sheriff's face darkened. "Noon tomorrow," he called after them. "I'll bring more than proof. I'll bring the whole town." Nora sat stiff in the saddle, the torn apron pressed against her heart, while Caleb walked beside the horse through the falling snow. Neither of them spoke until Mercy Creek disappeared behind them, but for the first time all day, Nora was not standing alone. The north road out of Mercy Creek climbed for 3 miles before the town finally lost its hold on the horizon, and Nora Mae Bennett kept her eyes on the horse mane because looking back felt too much like inviting the whole street to follow. Caleb Whitaker walked beside the gelding with one hand on the reins and the other resting near his coat pocket, quiet as fence wire in winter. He had not asked her to explain. That made her more nervous than if he had accused her. Men who asked too fast usually had their minds made up already. Men who said nothing gave the truth too much room to breathe. Snow blew sideways across the prairie, soft at first, then meaner as the land opened wide between town and ranch. Nora held the torn apron against her middle and tried to sit steady, but every bump in the road sent a tight pain through her ribs. She bit the inside of her cheek and kept her shoulders square. Caleb noticed anyway. "You're hurting." It was not a question. Nora looked at the gray sky. "I am sitting." "That was not what I said." "It is the answer I have." He glanced up at her, his face hidden under the brim of his hat. "You always talk around things?" "Only when the straight road leads. Someplace worse." The horse snorted, and for a while the only sounds were leather creaking, snow brushing against Caleb's coat, and the distant bell from town fading behind them. Then Caleb said, "Sheriff Pike does not ride out for nothing." Nora's fingers tightened on the apron. "He does not ride out for justice either." Caleb slowed. "That is a serious thing to say about a man with a badge. A badge is just metal if the man wearing it has no honor." He stopped walking then, and the horse stopped with him. Nora felt the stillness more than she saw it. Out here, the world was white field, black fence, and one lonely road disappearing toward low hills. There was nowhere to hide a lie. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "What did they say you took?" "Silver from the boarding house office. Bread from the pantry. A blue ribbon from Mrs. Harlan's sewing basket, though I never understood why any woman would risk her soul over ribbon." "Did you take any of it?" "No, why accuse you?" Nora swallowed, and the cold made the answer feel sharper. "Because I asked for my wages." Caleb's jaw moved once. "How long had they owed you?" 8 months. 8 months. Plus 3 Sunday dinners, 4 funeral suppers, and every breakfast they said came with my room. She looked down at her hands, red from cold and scrubbed raw from lye soap. "I wrote it down. Every dollar. Every sack of flour. Every hour before sunrise." Mrs. Harlan found the list this morning. Caleb started walking again, slower now. "Where's the list?" Nora's throat tightened. "In my recipe book." "And where is that?" She did not answer right away. The wind pushed at her bonnet. The horse shifted under her. Still in the Red Lantern kitchen, hidden behind the flour bin. Caleb said nothing, but his silence changed shape. It was not suspicion anymore. It was calculation. Nora heard it in the pace of his boots, steady, measured, already counting distance and time. "That book proves what they owe me," she said. "But it also names him." "Names who?" "Clay Pike. The sheriff's son." Caleb's hand tightened around the reins. "For what?" Nora stared at the white road ahead. "For taking from the office himself and telling me I would carry the blame better than he would." The words sat between them, plain and ugly, but not loud. Caleb did not curse. He did not promise. He only looked back toward the town they could no longer see. "Noon tomorrow," he said. Nora gave a tired breath. "You heard him." "I heard a man who expects fear to do his work before he arrives." She looked down at him then. "You should have left me there." Caleb did not look up. "Maybe." The answer should have stung. Instead, it sounded honest enough to lean against. "Why did you not?" she asked. His gaze went to the far ridge where a dark house stood against the snow, thin smoke rising from one chimney. Because my daughter has watched enough good people disappear from doorways. Nora followed his eyes. Whitaker Ranch waited ahead, quiet and weather-beaten, with the barn doors latched against the storm and one small face watching from an upstairs window. The child vanished the moment Nora saw her, but the curtain kept trembling long after she was gone. Whitaker Ranch looked less like a home than a place that had forgotten what homes were for. The house sat low against the Wyoming wind, its porch rails silvered by weather, its windows dark except for one upstairs pane where the curtains still moved in small nervous breaths. Caleb helped Nora down from the horse without putting his hands where she had not allowed them. He offered his arm, waited until she chose to take it, then led her up the steps while the gelding stamped snow from its hooves behind them. The front door opened into a narrow hall that smelled of cold wood, lamp oil, and a fire that had burned too low too many times. Nora paused on the threshold. Every house told the truth if a person knew how to listen. This one told it in the untouched sewing basket near the stairs, the woman's coat still hanging on a peg, the dust on the parlor piano, the silence tucked into every corner like folded black cloth. Caleb shut the door against the storm. Kitchen is through there. Nora followed the tilt of his chin and stepped into a room that had good bones and no heart left in it. The stove was black iron, large enough for ranch meals, but the ash drawer had not been cleaned properly. 2 flour jars sat half empty on the shelf. A coffee pot rested near the back burner. The table was sturdy oak, scarred by knives, elbows, and years of supper plates, but only one chair showed signs of use. On the far side of the room, a smaller chair faced the wall as if someone had pushed it away from the world and forgotten to turn it back. Nora saw it. Caleb saw her seeing it. "My daughters," he said. "Lily." Nora nodded. "How old?" 7. She looked smaller from the window. Caleb took off his hat and set it on a peg. "She has been small since her mother passed." The words landed hard and then vanished because Caleb Whitaker did not seem like a man who let grief stay visible for more than a second. He crossed to the stove, opened the firebox, and fed in 2 pieces of split pine. "You can sleep by the kitchen stove tonight. It is the warmest room." Nora held her apron tighter. "I can sit in a chair. You can sleep by the stove." His voice left no room for politeness to argue. Then he pointed to a narrow pantry door. "Blankets are in there. Wash basin is by the pump. Coffee is in the blue tin. Flour is on the shelf. Salt pork in the cellar if you are able to cook." "I am able." Caleb looked at her then, not cruelly, but with the same hard measure he had given the weather. "You cook if you can stand. You do not prove anything by falling down in my kitchen." The word "my" settled between them. Nora understood it. His land. His roof. His rules. Shelter was not trust. A woman who forgot the difference paid for it later. "Yes, sir." "Do not call me sir." "What should I call you?" "Mr. Whitaker." "That is just sir with more fence around it." For the first time, something almost moved at the corner of his mouth, but it was gone before it became a smile. He turned toward the stairway. "One more thing. Do not ask about my wife." Nora lowered her eyes to the stove. "I was not planning to. Do not touch my daughter unless she asks." "I would never. And when this trouble with Pike is cleared, you leave." Her fingers stilled on the apron. She had expected it. Hearing it still made the room feel colder. "Of course." Caleb studied her as if he had heard something behind the words. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Nora looked at the ash drawer, the cold table, the small chair turned toward the wall. Most folks do not ask that unless they want to feel sorry or feel relieved. "I am asking." "Then no." Caleb looked away first. That was when a board creaked above them. Both of them turned. Lily Whitaker stood halfway down the stairs in a pale nightdress, one hand on the banister, brown hair loose around a face too quiet for a child. Her eyes moved from Caleb to Nora, then to the torn apron in Nora's hands. Nobody spoke. Nora did not smile too brightly. She did not kneel. She only dipped her chin as if greeting a grown woman with dignity. "Evening, Miss Lily." The child did not answer. Caleb's jaw tightened with the old pain of waiting for a voice that never came. Lily took one slow step down, then another, and placed a small rag doll on the bottom stair. Its yarn hair was loose, and one button I was missing. Then she turned and climbed back up without a sound. Caleb stared after her. Nora looked at the doll, then at the kitchen stove, then at the flour jars. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly, "if I am sleeping by the stove, I might as well clean it first." By dawn, the kitchen at Whitaker Ranch no longer looked abandoned. Nora had worked slowly through the night, not because she had strength to spare, but because stopping made the cold settle into her bones and the worry settle into her thoughts. She cleaned the ash drawer, polished the stove door with an old cloth, washed the coffee pot twice, and set the flour jars in a straight line where morning hands could find them without searching. Every movement had to be measured. If she reached too high, pain caught under her ribs. If she bent too fast, the room tilted. So she learned the room by inches, the way a person learns a new life when the old one has thrown her out. When the first gray light touched the window, she found oats in a tin, cinnamon in a small glass jar, and honey wrapped in cloth at the back of the pantry. The honey had gone thick with cold. She warmed it near the stove, stirred milk into a small pot, and let the oats soften until the kitchen filled with a smell so gentle it seemed almost wrong inside a house that quiet. Caleb came in from the barn with snow on his shoulders and stopped at the door. His eyes went to the swept floor, the clean stove, the coffee already steaming. Then they went to Nora, who stood with one hand braced on the table and the other moving the spoon in slow circles. "You should have slept. The stove needed tending. The stove could have waited. Children do not always wait for breakfast." Caleb's face changed at that, just slightly. "Lily does not eat much in the mornings." Nora did not look at him. She sprinkled cinnamon into the pot. "Most children eat when food stops feeling like a question." He stepped closer. "What does that mean?" "It means nobody likes being watched for grief." The words were soft, but they landed hard enough that Caleb looked toward the stairs. For a moment, there was only the small sound of oats thickening and the wind worrying leaves. Then a floorboard creaked above. Lily appeared on the bottom stair in the same pale nightdress, her rag doll tucked under one arm. Nora did not brighten her voice. She did not say "good girl." She simply set a small bowl at the table, laid a spoon beside it, and pushed the honey jar close enough for little hands. "I made too much," Nora said. "Crooked habit of mine." Lily looked at the bowl. Caleb stood very still behind her. The child crossed the kitchen one quiet step at a time and climbed into the small chair that had faced the wall the night before. Nora turned the chair around without making a ceremony of it. Lily picked up the spoon. Her hand hovered. Caleb stopped breathing. Nora took her own bowl and sat at the far end of the table, giving the child space enough to choose. "My mother used to say cinnamon was for cold mornings and stubborn hearts," Nora said, as if talking only to the window. "I never knew whether she meant the food or the cook." Lily dipped the spoon into the porridge and tasted it. Nothing happened for 1 second. Then another. Then Lily took a second bite. Caleb gripped the back of the nearest chair until his knuckles paled. Nora saw it but did not look at him. A man deserved privacy when hope struck him too suddenly. Lily ate half the bowl before she glanced at Nora's wrist, where the sleeve had slipped just enough to show a dark bruise shaped like fingers. The spoon lowered. Nora gently pulled the cuff back down. "Some marks fade," she said. "Some take their time." Lily reached across the table and placed one small hand over Nora's sleeve, not touching the bruise, only the cloth above it. Caleb made a sound so quiet it might have been the house settling, except houses did not carry that much sorrow. Nora looked at the child and nodded once. "Thank you, Miss Lily." Lily did not speak, but she finished the bowl. Outside, the storm kept moving over the fields, and somewhere beyond the ridge, Mercy Creek was waking up to gather its judgment. Inside the Whitaker kitchen, a silent little girl pushed her empty bowl toward the woman they had thrown away, asking without words for more. The empty bowl sat between them like a small miracle nobody dared name. Caleb carried it to the basin himself, though the act looked strange on a man built for fences, cattle gates, and winter roads. Nora tried to rise, but the chair scraped only half an inch before pain caught her breath. She covered it by reaching for the honey cloth. Caleb noticed. He noticed too much. That was dangerous in a quiet man. Sit, he said. Nora looked up. I am the cook. You are also the one who nearly fell over my table. That was private. It happened in my kitchen. Then your kitchen has loose manners. Lily looked from one to the other, and something almost like amusement touched her solemn face before vanishing. Caleb saw it. Nora saw Caleb see it. For a moment, the whole room held still around that almost smile, as if even the stove knew better than to pop too loudly. Then Caleb turned to Nora. Your recipe book. Her fingers closed around the honey cloth. What about it? You said it was at the Red Lantern. I said the list was there. You also said it names Clay. Pike. Nora lowered her eyes. It does. Then I need it before noon. The word noon made the room colder. Outside, the storm had thinned, but the sky still hung low over the ranch, gray and watchful. Mercy Creek would come when the road allowed it. People like Sheriff Pike did not make threats to let them die in snow. Nora looked toward the window, then back to Caleb. If you ride into town for that book, they will say you are stealing from me. Let them say it. They will say worse. They already have. She breathed out slowly. Mr. Whitaker, men like Pike do not need truth. They need a room full of people willing to nod. Caleb leaned both hands on the back of the chair across from her. Then give me something that makes nodding harder. Nora stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached for the torn apron she had folded beside the stove. Her hands moved carefully over the hem until she found a crooked seam. From inside it, she pulled a thin packet wrapped in wax paper and tied with thread. Caleb said nothing. Lily stepped closer to the table. Nora set the packet down as if it weighed more than iron. I copied the accounts when Mrs. Harlan started locking the pantry. Caleb untied the thread. Inside were narrow slips of paper, each one covered in small, careful handwriting. Flour. Coffee. Molasses. Sunday supper. Room deducted. Wages unpaid. 8 months of work turned into numbers, because numbers could not blush, could not laugh, could not call a woman greedy for wanting what she had earned. Caleb read without moving his mouth. His face hardened line by line. This is enough to show they owed you. Maybe. Nora reached into the packet again and drew out one more paper, folded twice. That is the part one wished I had burned. Caleb opened it. The handwriting was larger, careless, pressed hard into the page. Keep quiet, big girl, or the whole town will learn to call you thief. Caleb's eyes lifted. Clay Pike wrote this? Nora nodded once. He left it under the flour bin after I saw him take money from the office drawer. He smiled when he did it. Like he had already watched the ending and enjoyed it. Caleb folded the note with slow precision. His voice dropped. Why did you not go to the sheriff? Nora looked at him then, not angry, not surprised, only tired in a way that seemed older than the morning. Because Clay calls him Pa. The kitchen went silent. Lily stood beside Nora's chair now, one hand resting on the table, her small fingers close to the wax paper slips. Caleb looked from the note to Nora's face, then to the marks half hidden beneath her sleeve. He did not ask for details. Maybe he understood that some pain did not need to be counted aloud to be believed. I will not send you back to them, he said. Nora's throat moved. Do not make promises because you feel sorry for me. I do not. Then why? Caleb looked toward his daughter. Lily had picked up one of the slips, not reading it, only holding it like a child trying to understand why paper could frighten grown people. Because this house has been quiet for a year, he said. This morning, she ate. Nora turned away too late to hide what that did to her. Lily moved then, quick and silent, and put the slip back on the table. She took one step toward Caleb, then another. Her voice came out small, rough from disuse, but clear enough to stop the wind in the walls. Papa, she said, do not send her back. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Nora pressed both hands flat against the table because the room seemed to tilt under the weight of those 6 words. When Caleb opened his eyes again, the man who looked at the door was not the same man who had brought her in from the road. I will not, he said. And outside, far beyond the frosted glass, the first dark shapes of riders appeared on the ridge. The riders on the ridge were not Sheriff Pike yet. They were 2 Whitaker hands coming down from the south pasture, collars high, hats white with snow, their horses moving careful over the frozen ground. Caleb opened the kitchen door before they reached the yard, and cold air rolled across the floor. Nora gathered the slips of paper into the wax packet, but her fingers had gone stiff. Lily stood close enough for her shoulder to touch Nora's chair, a small warm weight in a room that had known too much. Emptiness. "Stay inside," Caleb said. He did not bark it. He did not plead it. He spoke like a man setting a fence post deep enough to hold. Nora rose anyway. "If this concerns me, I should hear it." Caleb looked at the pain she tried to hide, then at the steadiness underneath it. After a moment, he opened the door wider. The two hands stopped near the porch. One was young, red-haired, with worry plain on his face. The other was older, gray at the beard, and careful with his eyes when he saw Nora. "Mr. Whitaker," the older man said, "Mercy Creek is moving." Caleb stepped onto the porch. "How many?" "Hard to say. More than a few. Sheriff Pike is at the front. Harlan from the boarding house is with him. Clay Pike too." Nora's stomach tightened at the name, but she made herself look at the stove instead of the door. A pot could be cleaned. A table could be set. A woman could keep her hands useful even when fear wanted them empty. The younger hand glanced toward her, then quickly looked away, not with mockery, but with the awkwardness of a man who had heard too much and understood too little. Caleb noticed. "This is Nora Bennett," he said. "She is under my roof." The words changed the porch. They changed the kitchen too. The older hand touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Nora nodded. "Good morning." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Caleb turned back to the men. "Feed your horses. Then come in for coffee." The younger hand blinked. Now. The men obeyed because Caleb Whitaker was the kind of man whose quiet sounded final. When he came back inside, Nora had already set out 4 cups. "I did not say you had to serve them," Caleb said. "You said coffee. That is not the same thing. It is in a kitchen." He watched her move slowly from stove to table, measuring each step, refusing to let her body make a spectacle of its hurt. Then, without a word, he crossed to the pantry, took down a lower stool, and set it beside the work table. "Sit when you need to reach," he said. "There is no shame in using wood instead of pain." Nora looked at the stool. Something in her face softened and tightened at once. "That is a strange kindness, Mr. Whitaker. It is a stool. Not to a woman who has been told all her life to stand until she breaks." Lily slipped from the table and carried her rag doll to the small chair. Then she dragged that chair, inch by inch, until it sat beside Nora's stool. The sound scraped across the boards, plain and stubborn. Caleb turned away, but not before Nora saw his jaw work against feeling. By mid-morning, the kitchen had become a working room. Coffee steamed. Biscuit dough rested under a cloth. Nora found dried apples in a jar and set them to warm with cinnamon, and soon the whole house smelled less like grief and more like something waiting to be remembered. The 2 ranch hands drank quietly at the table, careful not to stare. Lily stood on her chair and passed Nora a spoon when asked, then another when not asked. Caleb brought in wood and stacked it close to the stove without making a show of it. Every small act put weight back into the house. A cup filled. A fire fed. A child near enough to touch. Nora pressed flour into dough and felt, for one fragile hour, that the world had narrowed to things that could be mended by hand. Then the older ranch hand looked through the kitchen window and set his coffee down. Caleb followed his gaze. Nora did too. Across the white fields beyond the gate, a dark line was moving slowly up the road from Mercy Creek. Wagons, riders, Sunday coats, black hats, and Sheriff Pike at the front with his badge catching the noon light. Lily reached for Nora's apron and held on. Caleb stepped between the window and the room, his shadow falling long across the clean floor. "They are early," the young hand whispered. Nora wiped her floury hands on her apron and stood. Caleb looked at her. "You do not have to face them outside." Nora lifted her chin, though her hands trembled. "If I hide in your kitchen, they will call it guilt." Caleb opened the door, and the sound of approaching horses rolled over the yard. "Then we will not hide." The first wagon stopped at the gate, but Sheriff Amos Pike did not wait for permission to enter. He rode through like a man who believed every road in Wyoming had been laid for. His boots and the others followed because a crowd is braver when it can hide inside itself. Mrs. Harlan sat stiff-backed in the front wagon, wrapped in a black wool coat, her mouth pinched with the satisfaction of a woman arriving to see judgment served. Beside her stood her husband, red-faced from cold and anger, and near the sheriff rode Clay Pike with his hat tilted low, his smile easy, his eyes fixed on Nora as though the morning had already ended in his favor. Behind them came townsmen, church women, 2 store clerks, a freight driver, and boys old enough to know cruelty, but young enough to mistake it for entertainment. Nora stood on the porch with the wax packet held against her apron, the recipe slips folded inside like small white witnesses. Caleb stood 1 step below her, not hiding her, not presenting her, only making it clear that anyone who wanted the porch had to remember whose land they were standing on. The 2 Whitaker hands waited near the woodpile, silent. Lily was still inside, or so Nora hoped. Sheriff Pike swung down from his horse and brushed snow from his sleeve. "Mr. Whitaker," he called, "you have had your morning. Now hand over the woman." Caleb did not move. "You said you would bring proof." The sheriff smiled for the crowd. "Proof is standing right there in a stolen apron." Mrs. Harlan lifted her chin. "That apron belongs to my boarding house." Nora looked down at the torn cloth tied around her waist. "So do 8 months of my wages." A murmur passed through the yard. It was small, but Nora heard it. Sheriff Pike heard it too. His eyes sharpened. "Careful, girl." Nora's hands shook, so she pressed the packet tighter to steady them. "I am being careful. That is why I wrote everything down." Clay Pike gave a short laugh. "Listen to her. A cook with numbers. Next she will say she owns the bank." A few men laughed. Mrs. Harlan pointed toward Nora with a gloved hand. "Look at her standing on that porch like she is some lady of the house. She was hired for a stove and a broom, nothing higher." Nora felt the words strike old places, places made tender by years of being measured, weighed, dismissed, and named before she ever opened her mouth. She wanted to step back. She wanted the kitchen door behind her, the warm stove, the clean table, the cinnamon scent still clinging to the room like mercy. Instead, she unfolded one paper. "Flour delivery, March 3rd. Paid by my account because Mrs. Harlan said the boarding house was short." Mrs. Harlan flushed. "Lies." Nora unfolded another. "Sunday supper after Mr. Foley's funeral. 27 plates. No wages paid." Clay shifted in his saddle. Sheriff Pike raised his voice. "Enough." Caleb looked at him. "Let her speak. This is not a courtroom." "Then stop acting like judge." The yard went quiet enough for the horses to be heard breathing. Sheriff Pike's face hardened, but he turned to the crowd and spread one hand. "People of Mercy Creek, you know what she is. A stray woman with no family, no husband, no reputation, and hands always close to somebody else's pantry. Does she look like the kind of woman decent folks ought to believe over a respectable house?" Nora stood still. She felt every eye move over her body, her apron, her bruised wrist, her plain dress, her size. Heat crawled up her neck despite the cold. Then the kitchen door opened behind her. Lily stepped onto the porch in her little brown coat, hair loose, face pale but steady. In one hand she held the rag doll. In the other, she held a biscuit Nora had made that morning. Caleb turned sharply. "Lily." The child did not retreat. She walked to Nora's side and stood there, small as a candle against winter, then lifted the biscuit where everyone could see it. Her voice was soft, but it crossed the porch. "She made breakfast." Nobody laughed then. Nora closed her eyes for one breath, because that tiny sentence defended her more gently than any sermon could have. Sheriff Pike stared at the child, then at Caleb, and something ugly moved under his smile. "Move the girl inside, Whitaker," he said. "This is grown folks' business." Lily reached for Nora's apron and held on. Caleb moved before anyone else seemed to understand what Lily had done. He did not grab his daughter. He did not push Nora behind him. He stepped down from the porch and placed himself between Sheriff Pike and the 2 women. standing above him, his shoulders square to the yard, his hat brim shadowing eyes that had gone colder than the snow underfoot. "My daughter stays where she chooses," he said. Sheriff Pike gave the crowd a thin smile, but it did not sit right on his face anymore. "You are letting a child speak in a matter of law?" Caleb looked toward the biscuit in Lily's hand, then at the sheriff. "She has spoken more truth this morning than most grown men here." A nervous sound moved through the crowd. Not laughter. Not agreement. Something in between, the sound people make when a story begins to tilt and they are no longer sure which side will hold them. Clay Pike swung down from his horse and walked a few steps forward, brushing snow from his coat like he was too fine for the weather. "This has gone far enough," he said. "She has papers? Let us see them." Nora held the wax packet tighter. Caleb did not turn around. "You can hear them read." Clay smiled. "Why?" "Afraid folks will notice a cook cannot write anything worth reading." Nora's face paled, but she unfolded the last paper with hands that trembled only once. "This one is not my writing." Clay's smile faltered. Sheriff Pike's head turned a fraction. Nora lifted the note, and for the first time, her voice carried beyond the porch without breaking. "Keep quiet, big girl, or the whole town will learn to call you thief." The words spread across the yard colder than the wind. Mrs. Harlan looked away. Her husband stared at his boots. One of the store clerks muttered something under his breath. Clay reached for a laugh and found none waiting. "Anybody can write a note," Caleb said, "then write that sentence again." Clay blinked. "What?" Caleb pointed to the woodpile. "There is charcoal by the stove box. Paper on the table. Write it again." The yard held its breath. Clay looked at his father. Sheriff Pike's jaw had tightened enough to tell on him. "We are not playing schoolhouse games on your porch, Whitaker." "No," Caleb said. "We are watching a man refuse to prove his own innocence after demanding hers." That landed. Nora saw it in the faces near the gate, in the freight driver who stopped leaning on his wagon, in the church. Woman who lowered her eyes. Sheriff Pike stepped forward. "Hand her over." Caleb did not move. "No, she is accused. She is owed. She is just a cook." Caleb's voice dropped, and somehow that made it carry farther. "She is the reason my daughter ate." Lily's fingers tightened in Nora's apron. Nora felt the small pull and steadied herself, because the child was watching, because the whole town was watching, because for once her shame did not get to have the only voice in the room. Sheriff Pike climbed the first porch step. Caleb met him there, not touching him, only standing close enough that the sheriff had to decide whether he truly wanted to cross that line. "Move," the sheriff said. Caleb looked at the badge, then at the man wearing it. "No one touches a woman under my roof." "Your roof does not outrank the law." "Then bring the law. Not your son. Not your friends. Not a boarding house lie dressed up for Sunday." The sheriff's face darkened. "You are making an enemy." Caleb looked past him, over the wagons, over the riders, over every person who had come expecting to see Nora lowered. "I carried her off that street once," he said. "I dare any man here to drag her back to it." The silence that followed was so complete that Nora heard the biscuit crumble in Lily's small hand. Clay took one step back. Mrs. Harlan turned her face toward the wagon blanket. The older Whitaker hand removed his hat, not for the sheriff, but for Nora. Then Lily stepped to the edge of the porch, still holding Nora's apron, and said the words more clearly than before. "She stays." Caleb did not look away from the crowd. "You heard my daughter." And for the first time since Mercy Creek had thrown Nora into the cold, nobody in that town seemed able to find a single cruel word strong enough to reach her. For several long seconds after Lily spoke, the only thing moving in the Whitaker yard was the snow drifting from the porch roof. Sheriff Pike looked at the faces behind him and saw, perhaps for the first time, that a crowd could turn quiet in more than one direction. Clay Pike had gone pale around the mouth. Mrs. Harlan would not look at Nora. Her husband kept rubbing one glove against the other as if he could scrape the morning clean. Caleb stepped aside just enough for Nora to stand in full view, not behind him, not alone either, and she unfolded the wax packet on the porch rail. One by one, the slips were read aloud by the older Whitaker hand, because Caleb wanted every person there to hear the numbers from a voice that could not be dismissed as frightened or proud. 8 months unpaid. Flour charged to Nora and served to guests. Funeral suppers never settled. Coffee, molasses, oats, salt pork, and Sunday bread all marked in Mrs. Harlan's own ledgers when the freight driver admitted he had delivered them under Nora's name. Then came the note. When Clay was asked again to copy the sentence, his hand shook so badly that the charcoal broke before he finished the first line. Nobody cheered. That would have been too easy. Mercy Creek only stood there and watched the lie lose its coat in public. Sheriff Pike tried to speak of procedure, of proper offices, of confusion, but the words sounded thin now that his son would not meet his eyes. Caleb did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Take your crowd off my land," he said. "Settle what she is owed by Friday." Mrs. Harlan opened her mouth, closed it, and nodded once without lifting her face. The wagons turned slowly. The riders followed. Clay was the first to leave, and the only one who looked smaller on horseback than he had on foot. Sheriff Pike was the last. At the gate, he looked back at Caleb, then at Nora, but whatever threat he had carried from town had no place to stand anymore. By sundown, Mercy Creek had already begun changing its story, because towns do that when truth embarrasses them. By Friday, the money arrived in a plain envelope with no apology. By the next Sunday, the Red Lantern boarding house had empty tables where full ones used to be, and Mrs. Harlan learned that people who had laughed at cruelty did not always enjoy eating in the room where it had been served. Nora did not go into town to watch any of it. She stayed at Whitaker Ranch, where the stove needed tending, the curtains needed washing, and a 7-year-old girl had decided that breakfast tasted better when Nora sat at the table too. Weeks softened the bruises on Nora's wrists. They faded from dark to yellow to nothing at all, but Caleb never forgot the first time he saw them. He remembered in small ways. He put the heavy flour sack on the lower shelf. He fixed the pantry latch so it opened smooth. He built a wider work stool and pretended it was because the old one wobbled. Nora pretended to believe him. Lily began speaking more as winter loosened its grip on the valley. At first it was one word at a time. Spoon. Bread. Papa. Nora. Then came whole sentences, small and careful, like birds returning to a barn beam after a storm. The first time Lily laughed, Caleb had been carrying firewood through the kitchen door, and the sound struck him so hard he stood there with snow on his boots and wood in his arms until Nora gently took the top log before it could fall. Spring came to Wyoming in slow, muddy pieces. The ranch hands started finding excuses to pass through the kitchen after chores, drawn by coffee, warm biscuits, and the strange new feeling that the Whitaker house was not something to tiptoe around anymore. Nora baked bread every morning. Lily shaped the smallest loaf and called it hers. Caleb would come in from the pasture at dusk, wash at the basin, and sit where he could see both of them in the lamplight. One evening, when rain tapped softly against the windows and the first green showed beyond the yard, Lily climbed into her chair and pushed a crooked biscuit toward Nora. "Mama Nora," she said, "this one needs butter." The room went still. Nora looked at the child, then at Caleb. He did not smile all at once. It came slowly, like sunrise over a hard winter field. Nora pressed one floury hand over her heart, and when she answered, her voice was steady enough to fill every empty place the house had kept waiting. "Then butter is what it shall have." Caleb reached across the table and covered her free hand with